Oh, you must be a warmonger. Quite the contrary. China's the warmonger. Russia's the warmonger. Iran's the warmonger. North Korea's the warmonger. I'm a peacenik. And in order to have peace, you got to have strength. And we don't have enough strength. I come to you today out of grave concern. China's preparing for war. There's simply no question about it. They now have the biggest military navy on the face of the earth. They have the biggest infantry on the face of the earth. They're starting to outnumber us when it comes to nuclear weapons. You might recall 25 years ago, they couldn't even get a rocket off the ground. But Bill Clinton and his administration and the companies he was working with assisted them. What a dire disaster that was. And since then, China has been working, particularly in the last decade, not just to catch up to us militarily, but to surpass us. And they've done everything possible to do it. Steal our technology, use spies in our own country, undermine our own culture, and they've gotten a lot of help from the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party hates America. The Democrat Party is destroying America from within while we face this grave threat from without. This is a first in American history. Marxism from within, thanks to the Democrat Party, and Marxism from without, thanks to the Communist Chinese regime. Now they are, as you can see, not only building a military to try and defeat us, look at them geopolitically. Strategically now, Brazil in our own hemisphere, the biggest country in our own hemisphere, has now thrown in with the Communist Chinese, including their currency. The wealthiest Arab state in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, is now thrown in with the Communist Chinese, not to mention the Iranians and the Russians. Egypt has now decided to send missiles to Russia, which is its way of opening doors to Communist China. And you can see this going on around the world, but the greatest hit was taken the other day with Macron, the president of France, France being part of NATO. You might remember D-Day and all these other events that took place. That was France. A lot of our men died fighting Vichy France and the Nazis and trying to defeat the Nazis there so the French would be free. And what happens? One president, Macron, that SOB, stabs us in the back, specifically in the back. Amid reports that some countries are de-dollarizing, French President Emmanuel Macron suggested in a new interview that Europe should reduce its dependency on the United States. There's a great risk that Europe gets caught up in crises that are not ours, which prevents it from building its strategic autonomy, he told Politico. This phrase, strategic autonomy, is one now that Macron has been using. It's an ideology he's concocted. He has shared it with other European countries. Strategic autonomy, all that means is destroying NATO and undermining the alliances because they want to cut deals with China. The question Europeans need to answer, he said, is it in our interest to accelerate a crisis on Taiwan? No. The worst thing would be to think that we Europeans must become followers on this topic and take our cue from the United States agenda and a Chinese overreaction, he said. Wow. I'll get to this in a second. Macron said, Europeans cannot resolve the crisis in Ukraine. How can we credibly say on Taiwan, watch out, if you do something wrong, we'll be there? If you really want to increase tensions, that's the way to do it, he said. Macron also suggested that European nations should reduce their dependence on the, quote, extraterritoriality of the United States dollar. In other words, the dollar is the world's currency, but apparently it's not going to be for long. This is horrific. And this is what he says. He says it to Xi, he says it to Putin, he says it to the European Union. There's been speculation that recent actions by China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Iran, even France could spell doom for the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. Position that we have held since after World War II. Saudi Arabia is also reportedly in active talks with Beijing to price some of its Chinese oil sales in the yuan rather than the dollar. Brazil and China agreed to trade in their own currencies and won't use the dollar as an intermediary anymore. Joe Biden. Remember Joe Biden? Mr. Diplomacy, Mr. Globalism, we're back. He tells the world, we've lost Saudi Arabia, we've lost Brazil, we now have lost France. China's preparing for World War. They're preparing for war against us. And they're daring us at some point to either engage them militarily or to stand down. Now, how do I know that? You don't build the biggest navy on the face of the earth to defeat Taiwan. That's unnecessary. You don't build stealth jets and bombers to defeat the Taiwanese Air Force. That's preposterous. You're not building nuclear missiles to take over Taiwan. You're not building your military the way you are, the size and the expanse and the nature of the military to defeat Taiwan. And they're not going to be satisfied after Taiwan. They're eyeballing other places too, the Philippines, Vietnam, believe it or not. They're eyeballing parts of Japan. They're eyeballing parts of Australia. That's who's in the neighborhood, folks. And of course, South Korea. This is no joke. While we are degrowthing our economy, while we are destroying our energy independence, while unbelievably we're going to become more reliant on the communist Chinese when we go all electric, which will doom us to brownouts and blackouts because our grid cannot handle what the Biden administration seeks to do. We're dealing with ideological incompetence here that are dragging us over the edge, pulling us into a second status nation. The communist Chinese don't need a base on the west coast of Africa to deal with Taiwan. They don't need a deep water port in the Solomon Islands. You might have heard of Guadalcanal, where my great uncle fought, but now they have a deep water port for their Navy. They don't need to manage both sides of the Panama Canal if they're only concerned about Taiwan. They don't need 27 some bases or commercial centers in our hemisphere in violation of the Monroe Doctrine to take out Taiwan. They don't need a spy balloon floating over the United States gathering information from our most sensitive nuclear sites to take out Taiwan. And I could go on and on and on. China is preparing for war. We must prepare for war. It doesn't mean we go to war. It certainly doesn't mean we initiate a war. It certainly doesn't mean we provoke a war. But what do we mean by peace through strength? We gotta honor the strength part. Our military is not properly funded. We need to increase funding. I'm watching some of my friends on TV say, look at all the waste and the fraud and these companies. Folks, we have got to have a mentality, a psychology now that understands what we're up against. The access of the enemy has already been developed. It's China, Russia, Iran, and Korea. Why do you think Korea is firing missiles left and right? They know they can fire missiles now. They're preparing. Why do you think Iran's getting nukes? They're preparing. So I want you to understand what's taking place in this country. The isolationists have it completely wrong. The pacifists have it completely wrong. The propagandists about Ukraine, oh, another ending war, another. We don't get to pick our evil enemies. They pick us. And Ukraine is the first battle in this war. I have finally come to that conclusion today, given what China has said yesterday and what France is doing. France is stabbing us in the back. Macron is stabbing us in the back. What a bastard. What a complete buffoon. And Joe Biden keeps calling Xi. We don't know what he's calling him about. Whatever happened to the transcriptions? Remember those? He's a complete weasel, Biden. He is a complete appeaser. So God knows what he's telling them. Milley has sent all the wrong signals by calling his counterpart when Trump was president. No. We won't go to war. I'll let you know when we will. That guy should have been court-martialed and his big fat ass thrown out of the military. And then we have Secretary Austin, who's very, very concerned about the Israelis and protecting the terrorists in Palestinian territories. Really outrageous, as well as wokeism, which he pretends not to know anything about as Secretary of Defense. We have a disaster on our hands. And so I want to be the one, if nobody else will, to make it clear that we have to prepare for war. I'll be the Thomas Paine. I'll be the Paul Revere. It's okay. Trust me, I take enough crap online and everywhere else. Oh, you must be a warmonger. Quite the contrary. China's the warmonger. Russia's the warmonger. Iran's the warmonger. North Korea's the warmonger. I'm a peacenik. And in order to have peace, you gotta have strength. And we don't have enough strength.
Want to see more? Sign up for Levin TV.